Hello and welcome to today's Hinckley Forum. The Hinckley Institute of Politics is a nonpartisan institute at the University of Utah. The Hinckley provides an array of transformative experiences for students through internships, forums, and classes. Hinckley forums seek to foster public discourse and civil debate on the most current and pressing issues, bringing in local, national, and international thought leaders. Today's forum is presented in partnership with the YWCA Utah's Real Women Run. Real Women Run is a collaborative, nonpartisan initiative to empower women to participate fully in public life and civic leadership through elected political office at all levels, appointments to boards and commissions, participation in campaigns, and engagement in the political system. Real Women Run is a national network partner with the Rutgers Center for American Women in Politics. Thank you for joining us for today's conversation. Unfortunately, Senator Diedre Henderson was not able to join us today. We are actively working with her team to reschedule a time for her to join us. While these circumstances are not ideal, we would like to acknowledge that the Peterson Brown campaign, the Cox Henderson campaign, the Hinckley Institute of Politics, and Real Women Run all agreed to move forward with two separate 30-minute events. We appreciate your patience as we work to reschedule Senator Henderson and apologize for any inconveniences this may cause. Today, we will be having a 30-minute conversation with Democratic Lieutenant Governor candidate Karina Brown. Karina Brown is president of Friends of the Cache County Children's Justice Center Board and was a founding sponsor of the Medicaid Expansion Ballot Initiative adopted by Utah voters in 2018. She also serves on the Cache Valley Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors and is co-chair of the Cache Valley Legislative Committee. Brown is an advocate of civic engagement and co-founder of the Cache Valley United for Change organization. Our moderator, Karina Mejia, is a reporter at KSL TV here in Salt Lake City. She has worked as a bilingual reporter at CBS 58, Telemundo, Wisconsin, and as an anchor for NBC's KYMA News in Yuma, Arizona, Fox 39 News, and Univision Laredo in Southern Texas. We would like to thank our streaming sponsor, AARP Utah, and media co-sponsor KCPW to ensure these candidate conversations are live streamed, recorded, and broadcasted for the greater community. And with that, I will turn the time over to our moderator. Thank you.
And thank you very much for that lovely introduction. And we'll just go ahead and get started. We've got so many great things that we want to speak with candidate Karina Brown about. Again, thank you all for joining us. We look forward to hearing from a Democratic candidate, Karina Brown, and getting to know her a little more. This indeed is a historic election for many reasons, including the first time in our state's history that two women candidates from the two major parties are running for the state's second in command position. Now, Karina, I think this is also the first time a Democratic woman has run for lieutenant governor. Your running mate, University of Utah law professor Chris Peterson, has said of you, Karina is a natural leader and tireless community organizer. Her public service to people in need, her leadership on recent successful ballot measures, and her experience in rural small business development make her the right choice for our state. Now, Karina, we know that you live out in Nibley, up in Cache County, and you have 3 teenage daughters and 1 son. Your husband, Carl, is a doctor and Air Force veteran. Can you tell us a little bit about you and your family?
Well, thank you so much for this opportunity. Hinckley Institute of Politics and Real Women Run, and Karina for being with us today. Like she said, I'm a mother of 4 children. We have 2 daughters in college, a daughter that's a sophomore in high school, and then a son that's in junior high. And my husband Carl and I live in Nibley after moving around the country for his Air Force service. We started our married life out in Arizona, and then we moved to Michigan, San Antonio, Texas, Las Vegas, and we've lived in Utah. I've lived in Utah longer than any other state, so I'm proud to call it home. But my husband and our family time outdoors. Sometimes we play basketball together. I like to spend time outdoors, and for stress relief, I like to exercise too. So I'm honored to be on the ballot this year. There have been other Democratic female candidates for lieutenant governor, but I believe that this is the first time that there's 2 women on the ballot, a Republican and Democrat, for the office of lieutenant governor. So I'm honored to be on the ticket with Chris Peterson for governor.
Thank you so much. I'm from Arizona as well. And let's see here. Are you guys having a hard time seeing me? It looks like it's a little frozen on my end, but we'll continue if you can hear me. I noticed, Karina, that you have quite an impressive resume. You have a bachelor's, a master's, and you're currently enrolled at the Harvard Kennedy School for Public Leadership. And you somehow still managed to carve out time to get certified as a personal trainer. My question for you is, what is your driving force?
Well, my driving force, I found my driving force when it comes to civic engagement several years ago. My mother passed away in the healthcare coverage gap in 2013. And after she passed away, I was frustrated, sad, and angry. She had been a single parent for years after my parents divorced. I'm the oldest of 7 children, and I saw her struggle after they divorced in 1991, going back to school, working. And I learned about Governor Utah's Healthy Utah plan in late 2015, early 2016. And I thought that plan could help people in similar situations to my mother with healthcare access. That was Utah's version of Medicaid expansion. And I found my motivation and my voice, my civic voice, through that experience, studying that plan, communicating with legislators, urging them to vote for that Medicaid expansion plan. And although that plan did not pass, I learned a lot of good things out of that experience. One of them was receiving an email from an organization that was actively working against that plan, celebrating the fact that it didn't pass. And I realized in that moment that I needed to get more organized and make phone calls like they were doing. And I needed to communicate with people that were like-minded advocates. And so from that moment forward, I committed to being organized, to being engaged, and I never looked back after that moment. And so that's what motivates me, civic engagement wise, is knowing there's vulnerable people out there that I can help speak up for and give them a voice and fight for them.
You know,
and I was
as you
invited
mentioned,
to participate.
Thank you. You know, as you mentioned,
Go ahead.
I'll let you go first.
So I learned from healthcare advocates, legislators, nonprofit leaders, how to advocate for change. And then I was invited to participate as one of 5 sponsors of Proposition 3 to expand Medicaid. And I'm so honored to be a part of that process and seeing voters come together to approve that ballot initiative.
You know, you also mentioned, or as you mentioned, your mom was influential in getting involved in that process. You mentioned she was a Finnish immigrant, and she, I think, and I saw this on your website, she loved the word sisu. Can you tell us about that? And I'm sorry if I mispronounced it.
No, that's perfect. Sisu is a word in Finnish that describes grit and determination and overcoming tremendous odds. And the Finnish people used that grit and that sisu in the Winter War of 1939-1940 against the Russians. They came in to invade their country, and using the skills that they had, the resources they had, and cross-country skiing, dressing in white, using simple methods of warfare, they were able to fend off the Russians and only had to give up 10% of their country. So when I think of sisu, I think of my Finnish ancestors and their determination in the face of overwhelming odds.
Thank you so much for sharing us. That's such a beautiful story. I also noticed that you served a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Guatemala. So you speak Spanish. How did that experience help to shape you?
Well, for me, my mission to Guatemala was an extremely positive experience. I loved the people of Guatemala. It was life-changing in the sense that I felt free to serve, free to communicate with people in Spanish. You know, such a beautiful language, such a beautiful culture, learning how to get along with my companions, connecting with the people down there. It was a great experience and helped me learn more about what we have in common as human beings rather than focusing on differences.
Karina, as we've mentioned, this will be a historic election with matters of great consequence on the table. We want to move forward and ask you a few questions to better understand your platform and your priorities as candidate for lieutenant governor. Heading into the big one, COVID-19 and this pandemic. Firstly, as lieutenant governor, you would likely be tasked with spearheading the COVID-19 task force. In that position, what would be your top 3 priorities, and what would you do in the first 100 days to carry us through what could be several more months of social distancing, or possibly the beginning stages of rolling out a vaccine?
Well, thank you. That's an excellent question. You know, I feel very sympathetic towards people that have been affected, of course, with, you know, the lingering consequences of COVID-19, loss of life, of family members and loved ones, and also businesses that have been affected. And our campaign has recently released an 11-point plan to restore public health to the state of Utah, and it can be found on petersonforutah.com. But scientists and doctors need to take the lead on this. And I think testing, contact tracing, and masks and social distancing are so important, and make sure that we are following all of those recommendations. So the top 3 things that I would say is to ensure the pandemic is in the hands of health officials, and the decisions are being made best on the public health and medical science. So focusing on public health and medical scientists leading, and creating a more aggressive statewide educational campaign in partnership with community leaders on mask wearing, maintaining physical distance, avoiding crowded situation inside and outside, and limiting interactions outside of the household would be important. And then also maximizing testing capacity so that the testing time turnaround is no more than 24 hours would be important as well.
Thank you for that answer. I know it's a tough time, and it's hard to know what the most adequate path to take is when we really haven't had to take one like this before. One of the biggest concerns for Utahns is making sure our rising generation, i.e. our children, are not left behind during the pandemic. Schools are facing outbreaks and closures, which means switching to online learning. Teachers are also being asked to balance those teaching loads. It could include keeping track of distance learning students at the same time as their in-person learning students, and knowing who's on quarantine and who's where. As Lieutenant Governor, what would you do to support teachers, parents, and students? Do you see room for improvement in how things are being handled currently?
Well, I recently read an article that was published in one of the local Utah papers that a school district official commented that they have been frustrated with the lack of communication at the federal level on guidelines, on public health guidelines. And you know, that could translate. I know that our government here in Utah has been working hard to educate the school districts and the public, but even having more of a public health focus with clear guidelines and information for the school districts at the national level and at the Utah level would be important. I know that the 41 school districts in Utah each had the flexibility and the freedom to create their own plans. So I have children in 2 different school districts, so each school district created their own plan. But giving them even more information so that they don't feel like they're in the dark when it comes to managing COVID-19 transmission in their schools would be important. And also having adequate PPE, personal protective equipment for teachers and administrators. I read that some of them felt like there wasn't adequate PPE. Also getting information to parents. If the parents want their children to stay at home, I've read of school districts where they do have the flexibility to stay home and do online schooling. If at all possible, those students could stay home, do online, and the children that for whatever reason need to be in school, that would cut down on the number of students in the classroom and create more space for social distancing.
that same note, thinking about the collateral damage of the pandemic going forward in the years to come, a major concern is that young, bright, promising teachers are shying away from a career in education. The Teachers Association has mentioned that there are challenges currently in finding substitute teachers, even now in the midst of the pandemic. What would you do to attract teachers and guarantee that we have an adequate talent pool going forward?
Well, education, I think, is the foundation of Utah. It's the foundation of our success. And when we invest in teachers and children, we're investing in the future. Unfortunately, Utah is ranked one of the lowest states for per pupil funding in the country. And I think that needs to change. We're seeing some salaries rise in different districts throughout Utah, which is good. We also need to raise the per pupil funding for students in Utah and really put a focus on education. And that's where our priorities are. Unfortunately, there is Amendment G that will be on the ballot to decide whether we should amend the state constitution and to include funds for persons with disabilities along with education funding. And I think that is a mistake. I'm going to be voting no on that because both populations, the students of Utah and persons with disabilities, need more funding, and they don't need to split it between the two. I think we also should show more respect, admiration, and give credit to teachers just in our public discourse, in addition into funding.
Thank you, Karina. And I'm trying to just whiz through because I know we want to be respectful of your time, but going into the economics of financing this pandemic, how would you guarantee a fiscally responsible approach to the money being spent during the pandemic? How would you show transparency and ensure that the funding spent is done that the money spent is done so efficiently?
Well, because of taxpayer funds, there should be increased accountability and transparency. And I know that we're in a difficult time with the pandemic and decisions are made quickly. But if something isn't working, if like the contact tracing app that hasn't really shown to be effective, we're spending $10,000 a day on that app, I think we should revise the contract with that company and we shouldn't have to keep paying them. There shouldn't be money going to companies and businesses that have had former close relationships with elected officials in state government. I believe that when decisions are made, there was an audit that was just released within the last several weeks, there should be open communication and open dialogue as to how the money will be spent so that the taxpayers can see the process that is happening so that funds are not wasted. Especially when we say that we can't afford certain things like more masks for teachers. That was one legislation that was proposed in the special session for $5 million, and that was rejected. And we closed 3 low-income health clinics. The legislature in the special session voted to close 3 low-income health clinics. We should have our priorities on the health and safety of our residents and investing money in public health guidelines and procedures and equipment so that people are safe and protected.
And if a vaccine did come out, how would you distribute it? Or would you wait for further testing? How would you guarantee that it's safe? And how do you make sure it gets to all people, especially those most at risk, like minority communities?
Well, once the vaccine is out, I think it should be available for free to all Utah residents and have open relationships with minority community leaders so that they can communicate the efficacy or information about the vaccine so then people can make a decision on whether to get it or not. Also, I have heard some talk, some people don't even want to go back to work. A university professor that's an older woman didn't even want to go back to work in person teaching students until there was a vaccine. So we have to be very respectful of people's viewpoints. I've heard and they're afraid of getting the vaccine. And so I believe that the more options that people have as citizens, as residents, as patients, medical patients, that will be better for all of us. so they can make decisions when that is available.
And moving forward, we've got, and we all keep mentioning, we've got so many other things that just need to be addressed as well. Housing, transportation, infrastructure within that, air quality, the rapid growth in our state. How would you help the governor prioritize those issues that Utahns are facing? And which do you think we need to address first after we get through COVID or while we're getting through COVID?
Well, that's an excellent question, and I have full confidence if Chris and I are elected in his ability to prioritize, and I of course would be sharing my opinions with him, and he's a good listener. When it comes to those priorities, I think we need to look at housing. Infrastructure is important as well to go along with that, but we have more people migrating to Utah because of the pandemic, because of teleworking. And we need to look carefully at how we're planning housing for all of the state of Utah. So, and I'm the mother of 4 kids, and I want my children to be able to afford to live in Utah. And if things continue at the current rate, that is not going to happen. And when my family moved to Cache Valley, there weren't many homes to rent, and so or buy. We ended up renting and then buying a couple of years later because we saw the housing markets collapse in Las Vegas, and so we were reluctant to buy a home right away. And I know that Utah demographics are changing. Younger people don't necessarily want or need a large home on acreage. So we need to look at smaller homes or alternatives people can afford, combined with robust education, job training, and supporting quality employers. And we don't want a situation where teachers and law enforcement can't afford to live here. I serve as a Nibley City Planning Commissioner, and we have worked on an accessory dwelling unit ordinance the past several months, which I'm very proud of, which can potentially increase housing units in Nibley. So looking at planning and zoning in different areas. And I think public, private, and nonprofit partnerships are important. These are some examples like the Utah Housing Coalition, Crossroads Urban Center, and the Coalition of Religious Communities. They recently released a report on child homelessness in the state of Utah and discussed its recommendations for improving outcomes for children and parents who have experienced homelessness. The state of Utah has a commission on housing affordability. There's other professional organizations working at the forefront of both infrastructure and housing, the Congress for the New Urbanism and Strong Towns. And recently I watched an Ivory Homes webinar where they're really focusing on creative solutions to housing. One of them is a hack-a-house. It's a yearly 24-hour hackathon-style competition created to tackle the affordable housing crisis. So it's led by university students, and they explore different solutions for housing affordability. There's examples of creative housing solution where I live in Cache Valley. There's a life cycle zoning ordinance in Providence, Utah, where single-family homes, townhomes, condos can all be in the same neighborhood. And I think this is beneficial so residents of all ages and demographics can associate and support each other. We recently went on a trip to Moab, and we learned of a tiny home development there. They're all sold and construction has not even started. And I recently toured the Borden Lofts in Logan. It is a Borden milk plant built in 1900 that was remodeled into loft apartments. So the builder got historic preservation grants and tax credits for the project. And it was inspiring to see historic preservation combined with modern living. As we know, people are having a hard time with the pandemic, and so people are at risk of homelessness. We went to St. George, and a resident there told me that there's hundreds of St. George school children that are homeless. So we really have an affordable housing crisis. Crossroads Urban Center did a webinar recently too, just saying we need to create spaces for people that are making about $40,000 a year. Where are they going to live? And so that is a really big issue when it comes to issues facing Utahns.
Thank you, Karina. This question, quite a few people mentioned it to me that they were wondering about that. During the vice presidential debate, Senator Kamala Harris stated that she would seek to decriminalize marijuana at the federal level under a Biden administration. Is that something that you would support, and what would it mean for Utah?
Well, I think Utah has made a good step by approving medical cannabis by Proposition 2 in 2018. And so that is a good relief for people that are experiencing different physical ailments or diseases or conditions. I know several personal friends that are had proposition passed to give them some relief as alternative to opioids. I personally don't support decriminalizing medical marijuana at the federal level. I do think it should be changed. The classification should be changed so that it's easier banking wise for states that have medical cannabis or cannabis sales to transfer funds when people are buying the products. But I personally don't support that effort to decriminalize marijuana at the federal level.
Thank you. Moving on to the issue that we saw, throughout the summer, and the issue of how do you look at police reform, racial justice issues, and social justice. You've stated that you would encourage implicit bias training for our law enforcement communities. What would that look like?
Well, I'm not sure what the training that they have when they go through the police academy, including it in that, but we have so many brilliant people in Utah, in the United States, creating that implicit bias training by PhDs, people in sociology and psychology, and allowing them to interact and present that information from their viewpoint to law enforcement in their training when they train to become a police officer, and then also yearly when they have to do additional training. That would be important. And I think training into what we believe as individuals, how we've been raised, what our automatic reflexes, our responses are when we see people of a different race or background. And I have respect for different communities and the struggles that we face right now. Law enforcement that are called to the scene to handle difficult situations when it comes to mental health calls, because we haven't done as well as we should with mental health care in Utah and in this country, or domestic violence calls. We need more training for them, but we also need more health care access for the residents of Utah with mental health and physical health as well. But that implicit bias training would be important because they are on the front lines of dealing with traumatic situations that people are involved in every day.
Along those same lines, I love that you mentioned that across the nation, several police departments are reporting that morale is low among officers. What would you do to ensure that the law enforcement community feels supported while also helping to weed out the bad apples from the bunch?
Well, that's a great question. And first of all, I sympathize and my heart goes out to the families that have lost loved ones recently due to the actions of certain police officers. And we can create positive change through positive ways, through getting involved in our communities, through voting. But I think it's important to create relationships with law enforcement and the public at the same time, building bridges between the public and law enforcement, so that both sides, both the public and law enforcement, feel supported. I think it's important to work with the police officers union to get their perspective on things that would work with law enforcement, and taking the load off, like I mentioned before, taking some of the load off of law enforcement. So they're not the ones always going to the scene of domestic violence and mental health calls. In Cache County, I'm really proud of the effort that they have made for social workers to go on to the scene of domestic violence calls with law enforcement. So each of them feels supported, and they use their expertise to get through a very difficult situation.
We're going to move on to questions that are coming from those watching live right now. There's a few that are kind of along the same line, so I'm going to try to consolidate them. Utah has been a solid red state for years now with little sway. How does your ticket handle this when it comes to outreach and swaying voters to vote for you? And if elected, how would you work with a Republican-dominated state legislator?
Well, that's a great question. I'm married to my husband, Carl. He's a Republican. He's been very supportive of me. I live in majority Cache County, majority conservative Republican Cache County, and most of my friends and family are Republicans. So I their viewpoint. I ran for Utah House District 5 in 2018, and through that experience, even though I lost, I was able to form great relationships with legislators in Cache County and other legislators in the state. And so I think working together in a bipartisan spirit of cooperation, open communication, and forming those positive, good relationships is something that I would focus on.
Here's another question that I find interesting. Do you approve of Representative Chris Stewart in promoting a grand staircase to a national park? Why or why not?
I recently saw that headline just within the past day, so I need to research it more. Just going off of what I know, little I know, I think that would be a good idea. I think it would be a good tourist draw, although I need to research it more. Utah has so many gems, natural gems, when it comes to our landscape, outdoors, that are treasures to not only Utah residents, but tourists. And so just from that, I would say yes, but I need to look into it more.
Thank you, Karina. And like we mentioned, we want to be respectful of your time and everyone that's joining us right now. We look forward to this election cycle and conversing with Senator Henderson at a later time. We will end our conversation at this point. But again, we want to thank you for joining us and just wish you the best going forward with this election cycle. The link will also be available on YouTube to stream at a later time.
Well, thank you so much, Garna, for your time at Hinckley Institute and people watching out there. So it's an honor to be on the ballot.
Thank you.
Thanks.